When you're staring at a sky full of points that look the same from a backyard, it's easy to wonder whether a high-definition monocular will actually give you anything more than a vague sparkle. I get that hesitation because I've spent a lot of evenings trying to decide if the next piece of gear will finally let me see those craters on the moon or the faint bands of Jupiter, or if I'll just be tacking on another box that gathers dust. The real question is whether this particular monocular lives up to the hype, fits into the way most of us actually use a telescope, and justifies the price tag without pulling us into a rabbit hole of accessories we never needed. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the thing that sets this monocular apart from a typical pair of binoculars is its astronomical telescope optical system. It's built around a fairly long focal length that promises to bring deep space objects into sharper view, and a focus ratio that lets you dial in a clear image from the moon all the way out to the Orion Nebula. That sounds impressive on paper, but the practical impact is something you'll notice when you actually set it up on a clear night. The design is a single tube, shaped frame that folds down for storage, which means you can slip it into a regular backpack rather than lug around a bulky tripod. For people who live in apartments or who like to pop out to a local park for a quick look, that portability is a genuine advantage. Now, let's talk about who will get the most out of this. If you're an adult hobbyist who already knows a bit about star hopping, say you can locate Orion's belt and you want a closer look at the Messier objects, this monocular gives you a step up from a basic pair of 850 binoculars without demanding a full-size, motorized mount. The high-power optics are strong enough to resolve the Cassini division in Saturn's rings on a decent night, and the focus mechanism is smooth enough that you can track a moving object without constantly readjusting. That makes it a solid companion for weekend quick-look sessions, especially if you already own a basic pair of binoculars and feel ready to graduate to something a little more focused. On the flip side, if you're a complete beginner who can't tell the difference between a planet and a bright star, or if you're hoping to replace a full-size Dobsonian for serious deep sky imaging, you might be better off putting that money toward a sturdier mount and a larger aperture telescope. The monocular's aperture, often referred to as its caliber, sits at a size that lets a fair amount of light in, but it can't compete with a 6-inch Dobsonian when it comes to pulling out faint galaxies. Also, because it's a monocular rather than a true binocular, you'll have to keep one eye closed, which can feel a bit unnatural for people accustomed to binocular viewing for birdwatching or daytime nature trips. If you're primarily interested in terrestrial spotting, the high magnification will quickly make the image shaky without a steady hand or a small tripod. Speaking of steadiness, that brings us to a practical weakness many users overlook. The monocular's weight is modest, light enough to hold for a few minutes without fatigue, but it's not negligible. When you push the focus up to its maximum power for a deep sky object, any tremor in your hands is magnified, turning a crisp view into a jittery blur. I found that using a lightweight travel tripod, the kind you can clip onto a backpack, makes a noticeable difference. The downside is that the included mounting bracket is basic. You'll probably want to invest in a better adapter if you plan to use the device for more than a few casual sessions. Another aspect worth mentioning is the focus ratio, which essentially tells you how finely you can adjust the image. In practice, the knob on this model feels like a small, precise dial rather than a rubbery wheel, so you can lock onto the crisp edge of a lunar crater without overshooting. However, the range isn't infinite. Once you dial past a certain point, the image will start to soften again because you're pushing the optics beyond their optimal distance. That's a trade-off that isn't obvious until you're actually out under the sky, and it means the device shines most when you stay within the sweet spot of mid-range magnification, around 20/30. Push it to 60 for a planetary view and you'll see the benefit of the long focal length, but you'll also notice a loss in brightness that can make dimmer deep sky targets disappear. Let's get real about value for money. The price point for this monocular sits in a range where you could also buy a decent entry-level telescope with a small mount. What you get here is a compact, high-definition optic that doesn't require a permanent setup. If your typical stargazing routine is grab the gear, set up on the balcony, look for a